Hi, this is Gary Collins, the creator of the Primal Power Method, and Heath Squier, CEO of Julian Bakery, and John Durant, Urban Caveman. Does that work out well? Or Metropolitan Caveman?
Modern caveman, urban caveman, professional
There
caveman,
you go.
dashingly handsome, any of those.
Harvard educated.
Right?
Harvard miseducated.
Well, that would be good too. Thanks for coming on the Primal Show, and we'd like to talk about that a little bit because not everyone's going to be familiar with your background. And just kind of introduce yourself as, how you got into it, your education background, and how you found this kind of primal, paleo, ancestral health kind of life.
Yeah, it really originated when I was in college. I studied some evolutionary psychology. And so I got used to taking this evolutionary perspective and saying, how do we evolve? How did we live in our ancient past? How do we live today? And what sort of mismatch might there be between how we evolved and how we live today? I had the opportunity to work with a guy named Steve Pinker, who's an evolutionary psychologist, and so I really started to appreciate the power of evolution to generate really smart hypotheses to use as a starting point to think about biology and how it functions. I didn't study any health or nutrition in college, and then when I graduated, I moved to New York, left all that behind, took a consulting job, and like a lot of people at their first desk job, my health took a dive. Came across paleo in 2006 through Art Devaney. My brother read his blog, knew that I was trying to be healthier. He sent me his early essay, Evolutionary Fitness. And then I read that, it clicked. I had looked at all of the different diet books in the bookstore, and I had never been on a diet before. I was athletic. I just ate, and things seemed to work out fine. And if I was like a little bit heavy, I'd cut back on pizza or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I was really turned off by the whole diet world. And then seeing this evolutionary approach, it just sort of clicked. I read Devaney's essay, I viewed it as a starting point. I said, okay, well, I want to go sort of check what sort of foods were eaten back then, how people lived, but this framework seems very powerful. So gave it a shot in 2006, and then was involved in a lot of media in 2010 when paleo really started to take off. New York Times piece, a Colbert episode, flipped that into a book deal, quit my day job, and wrote the Paleo Manifesto.
Okay. Yeah, I actually read it. I'm one of the few people, you sent it to me, and I'm one of the few people, actually people send me books, John, and they're pretty surprised that I read them. And I don't scan them. If you send it to me and you're going to be on the show, I'm going to read your book from word one to the last word. And I did. You warned me. You sent me a couple emails saying, hey, you're going to see some stuff in here that you haven't seen in normal paleo books. And, like all of us, I've read enough paleo primal books I don't need to read anymore, but I only read them, like I said, if people send them to me now, and I've written my own as well. So it was very interesting. There were some things in there that I was like, no one has written about this. And my first question would be, how did you end up, because you're the only person I've seen do this, putting religion into hygiene and tying that in and disease? I thought that was very interesting how you did that.
Yeah, that was my favorite chapter in the book. It's chapter 4. It's called Moses the Microbiologist. And just to give people context of how it fits in, there are 3 parts to the book. It's basically past, present, and future. The past is a short history of humanity. The present is more practical, topical advice on how to be healthy, or an exploration of how to be healthy. And the future is short. It's on ethics and the environment, and where we're going. So the past, I actually downplayed the Paleolithic a little bit. I talked about where we came from as sort of primates and then hunter-gatherers in the wild. And then there's this period, the agricultural age, where we settle down in cities, we domesticate plants and animals, and infectious disease explodes. And so the single greatest health threat of that era wasn't diet, it wasn't exercise, because people were tilling the fields, which is a lot of work, more work typically than being a forager. It was infectious disease. And now the tricky thing about germs is they're usually invisible, and they spread via so many different vectors. And people are learning this with Ebola right now, that very small amounts can still be infectious and deadly and can be transmitted through all these different bodily fluids, or maybe a sneeze, or intercourse, sexual intercourse, things like that. Now, people back then, so they didn't know that germs existed, or not in sort of a formal scientific sense. And so a lot of people, they would look at people dying of disease and they would attribute it to the gods.
Yeah.
God is striking down that person for doing something wrong. They're unhappy with them. And you start to get some cultural beliefs that bubble up. It's hard to say exactly how it happened. We'll probably never know. But you see it in Zoroastrianism, and then Judaism, and then spreading from there, where hygiene codes became very important to religious practice. Hand washing. Hand washing alone is Nobel worthy, right? And it's actually, we sort of take it for granted. Washing your hands is not intuitive. It's not an intuitive behavior at all. To say, oh, this part of my body, I'm going to run under this liquid and rub my hands together and then dry it off. And if I do this regularly, multiple times a day, I'm going to live 10 years longer.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It's not obvious at all.
No.
And so we should really appreciate that, there are 3 injunctions in the Torah, in the first 5 books of the Bible, for Jewish priests or Jewish people to wash their hands, and in scientifically appropriate situations, after touching a corpse, after coming in contact with bodily fluids. And then it was, a lot of these rules were interpreted to mean, okay, wash your hands before you eat, after you wake up, after you have sex, after you go to the bathroom. All the times when most people today will now wash their hands.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just hand washing, it was burial and corpse disposal, and corpses are huge vectors for disease. Again, as we're seeing in Africa right now, a lot of traditional burial practices there are actually exposing people to pathogens, and it's getting them into trouble. So this chapter was really about an exploration, primarily of Judaism, of how there was a lot of wisdom in these ancient hygiene rules in terms of personal hygiene and public health.
Well, and I found it very fascinating in the sense that when I was reading it, I saw a different tie-in than I don't know if other people did, because you did talk about the agricultural revolution. So we basically 10,000 years ago started doing agriculture and starting, to settle down in communities instead of having more of a migratory kind of, hunting, gathering, and having a different kind of lifestyle. Well, with that became cities and more dwellings. And anyone who studies any of this stuff knows that when you start to bring animals, anything together in small, compact groups, disease evolves, and it's Mother Nature thinning the herd, is how I've always said it. Because Mother Nature doesn't want anything to overpopulate. And so when cities started to come up, it was right around the time, 5,000 years ago, Egypt, the Romans, and religion started to rise at the same time as these cities went on disease. So it was all tied together. So agriculture, cities, religion, it all comes together. And that's how I read into it. I didn't know if most people got that out of it. That's how I was looking at it.
You're exactly right. It does all come together. Infectious disease is a network phenomenon, right? You see these sort of pictures maybe of the internet or of a social network as if you're looking down on top of it, and you've got all these nodes and vectors. And the more people, the more animals, these are just potential hosts for pathogens. And the more nodes there are, the more hosts there are, and the denser the network, the more you're going to get viruses. It's just like a computer network, too.
Yeah.
Or not exactly like, but it's another example.
When you type DNA into software coding, and I thought, I love that, because I've always said the same thing, that the human body genetics is basically a computer program. I mean, it really is.
It's an information technology.
Yeah.
It's an information technology. And you know, the state of much of the universe is entropy. Things decay. Things fall apart. Heat death. So to resist entropy, this is sort of a high-level point, but to resist entropy, you need information. You need to encode somehow order.
Yeah.
And so the information DNA and other types of information technology in our own biology, it basically is a way of maintaining and imposing order on and sort of an inherently chaotic universe, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, humanity is chaos, but what we're trying to do is it's controlled chaos.
I think that's a T-shirt. I think you need.
Oh, let's do it. We'll print them out tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, and I think I look at it in a different way, and I think Heath does too. Me and Heath are different in our philosophies, and that's why we get along so well on a lot of things. But I did find that fascinating in the book that you did touch on some subjects that most people never think about. And it was definitely not the typical paleo book. One thing I was a little confused about, though, was your food doctrine.
Okay.
And I'll let you explain that because I'm a primal guy. So I believe that you can incorporate, some dairy, not regularly. It's a treat as long as it's grass-fed, raw if at all possible, dairy. But you talked about fermenting grains and fermented dairy products. And with the paleo moniker being on the book, I got a little confused because that is the antithesis to paleo. And that's all. It's more of ancestral health, kind of a Sally Fallon, Weston A. Price kind of philosophy. Is that kind of what it was, or?
So it was. Everybody who writes a book on food, almost everybody faces an interesting challenge of saying, okay, how are these recommendations going to stand the test of time?
Yeah.
And given that there is so much information out there, and so much scientific work being done and things yet to be discovered, how do you say something meaningful that gets people going in the right direction without also sort of pigeonholing yourself into one exact corner and one way of eating? So I was frankly trying to come up with something where I could get people going in the right direction, but leave a little bit of flexibility for personal customization or their own genome or their own ethnic or genetic background and things like that. So the way I thought about it was directly based on this first part of my book where I go through these different ages of human existence: Paleolithic, agricultural, industrial, information. So I use the Paleolithic as a starting point, right? This is you don't have to end there, but it's a good place to start. And use our understanding of the Paleolithic and hunter-gatherers for understanding edible food groups, perhaps macronutrient ratios, eating frequency, omnivory versus not, things like that. Step two, the agricultural age. This is where all these cultural traditions come into play. And it really does hark back to, okay, well, I gave the example of the religious cultural traditions that allowed us to be healthier in this novel habitat. Well, there are other cultural traditions. There's fermentation, there's alcohol, there's dairy. And I think we should selectively embrace some of those things and be open to them.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I'm not going after you on that. It's more of, I was more of, it's tough because me and Heath, we talk about this a lot. Let me
get in here.
Yeah.
So I'm the largest paleo food manufacturer in the world right now, and we ship product worldwide. And one of my points in making paleo foods is to obviously help people transition from a mainstream way of eating into a paleo way of eating and stay there.
Yeah.
And through the teachings of Dr. Cordain and also how I personally transform my body and my health, I've been able to take those ingredients and manufacture foods such as coconut flake cereal, coconut wraps, paleo protein, and derive them from the core ingredients that paleo has, which is dairy free, grain free,
right,
legume free, and be able to develop these products, as well as still drive home the point that you can have these products and bacon and avocado and all these other wonderful things without going outside of this paleo template.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people are calling paleo, and then they'll try to throw potatoes and legumes and grains in. I'm trying to keep people focused on the core principles of paleo by developing these foods using paleo ingredients or real food ingredients.
Yeah. And how did you deal with that dilemma for us? Because paleo, the way we look at it is, and we've been called some interesting names over it. We're dogmatic and we're zealous of paleo. And anyone who knows me knows I am not. I'm a very flexible. I take ethnic background. I'm into fermenting. I ferment my own foods. But when you put the moniker paleo with it, and then how'd you do that? Because you're using the paleo moniker, but you're using anti-paleo foods. How do you do that in your teachings? I mean, how do you cross?
Yeah, but at the same time, in the foods that you make, like processing methods are a valid area to discuss whether something is paleo or not, and I'm sure you're using processing methods, right?
Yeah. Well, we for instance, like when we make a coconut wrap, it's just blended and dehydrated so that it's still raw.
Yeah.
If we're making, we're not tweaking or using processed ingredients outside of the core, like a real food ingredient item.
Yeah.
Now, given, the point of the products that we're using is to help people keep on track. Because the transition from a mainstream diet where they're used to eating whole wheat bread, in McDonald's, it's a difficult jump to all of a sudden just go, hey, I'm paleo, without falling off the wagon. That's why instead of telling people, hey, just do this for 30 days and you're going to be better, I'm trying to give people a way of living, a template, a diet. And still allowing them to stay within the paleo kind of template without adding in legumes and grains and all these things that a lot of other people in the paleo community are doing. Now, keep in mind, I make a grass-fed whey protein, but it's whey. So that would be considered primal. I'm putting it outside of the paleo kind of template. And it's cool. It just, we try to distinguish it, because if you're trying to add in grains and these items that aren't paleo, it confuses people. And then all of a sudden it's like, if I'm trying to lose weight and I'm trying to use paleo and I'm adding in grains, which are going to wreck your blood sugar, and you're trying to lose weight, you're probably not going to get the best results when trying to implement in grains. And so that's all. We like to have a lot of clarity, and we like to try to keep paleo. And if you're going to add something from the outside, to define it as like, hey, this is in addition to.
Right.
Because is that your personal diet, or was that your diet because it's kind of a recommendation, and that's what I was trying to figure out as I was reading, because it's you go through it and it's very you outline everything. I didn't know if that was your diet per se, or was that what you recommend as a paleo diet, or just a diet in general? Are you just not even in the paleo realm at that point, would you say?
No. I think the only divergence from sort of an orthodox approach was saying experiment with dairy. I mean, were there other?
You had fermented grains in there as well.
Yeah, I have like 3 lines.
It was real basic, and that's why I just wanted to clarify, because believe me, I think I'm a person who believes that everyone is different, just like you, and certain people can handle fermented grains no problem, long as it's heirloom based, and some people, northern Swedes are they're less than 30% lactose intolerant, so they can eat all the dairy, and they eat a ton of dairy. So I never want to exclude anything. It was just more of the confusion of there's paleo is the main part of the title, but when I read the actual nutrition information, it wasn't technically paleo.
Let's disagree. Let's open up the 1-page thing in the back. And, I mean, it's I think it's let me get my copy. Hold on.
That's why I wanted to make sure I had it right.
Jeez, Gary.
No, I just wanted to make sure. I was a little confused when I read it, that's all.
No, it's valid. I mean...
I was just a little confused, that's all. I just wanted to make sure I was reading everything right
I mean, some people have made criticisms of paleo saying, look, hunter-gatherers in the Paleolithic were opportunistic. They would eat foods for the first time. They were foragers. We were omnivores. There was, we did eat roots and tubers, things like that. So I think it's valuable to say, okay, here's an orthodox paleo approach, but I think we should embrace things like traditional ways of fermenting foods, and sort of focus on gut microbiome and that whole area where we've clearly depleted our gut microbiome, and a lot of these traditional foods are what's available.
But fermenting grains, it still has gluten in it. It's not doing your gut any sort of good. I mean, period. So I guess, and it's a major allergen. And keep in mind, I mean, I used to make sprouted grain bread, so I mean, I grew up with it, and not until I completely got rid of all grains from my diet did my allergies completely go away. I mean,
Right.
And sure, some people can process it, but at the end of the day, it's a massive allergen. It has gluten. It's not why you don't need grains at this point. There's so many other wonderful things that we can consume, and I guess our question is like, hey, you know what? It's not a core principle of paleo. Why confuse people about grains? And it's something that can be experimented with, but it's clearly outside of paleo, because at the end of the day, there was no way for Paleolithic man to consume like beans. They weren't boiling water back then.
There's definitely evidence of soaking nuts. I mean, because I view grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds as part of the same rubric as seeds, the reproductive organ of the plant, and so some people are much more pro nut and seed in paleo, and I'm a little bit more skeptical of that, because some of those nuts and seeds, particularly eaten in high quantities, have some of the same potential allergen issues as
that's where me and you agree, actually. I truly believe that too. I think in the paleo world, especially recently, they have I've written little pieces about don't go nuts for nuts on one of my blog posts, because what we do, I've done it. I don't know if you did it, but when I did it several years ago, I totally overconsumed nuts because I was nuts are great, not realizing then I started getting inflammation from.
But legumes are a different story, and they don't belong.
Well, he doesn't. You don't support legumes, though.
No,
No.
Yeah, so
no. John doesn't talk about legumes at all.
I mean, on page one,
he just said legumes in his statement there, just to clarify.
No, what I said was I view seeds, the reproductive organ of the plant, as the issue.
But they don't belong in a paleo diet. I mean, there's no need for them to be in there. We just had a real issue with Chris Kresser going on Dr. Oz mentioning legumes as a part of paleo, and I about fell out of my chair, because why include legumes as a part of a paleo template on national TV, once again causing massive confusion when they don't belong there?
That's all. We're just trying to clarify, because I agree with you. Fermenting foods has been around a long time. That we didn't have refrigeration. Right. We know that.
Right.
But I was just curious if that was part of your diet. Do you implement fermented grains and fermented?
I don't eat any fermented grains. Nutritional reasons aside, I find it too time consuming, and
I agree.
I don't have much space here in New York, so it's just sort of a pain in the butt.
In general, I think even if you live on a farm, people don't understand fermenting foods and sprouting grains takes a huge amount of effort. It's a lot of work. It really is.
I think what I was trying to accomplish in some of my discussions of grains and legumes was also pointing out to people that these were, in some sense, these were fallback foods, or suboptimal foods that we developed culinary traditions to sidestep or get around some of their drawbacks. Like fermentation is an imperfect method to detoxify some of these foods. So when you're like, oh, okay, we use these methods to detoxify these foods, and we're eating way more of them, these grains and legumes now, and we're not even using traditional methods to detoxify them. So it's sort of a double bad.
Yeah, and that's kind of the Weston A. Price kind of philosophy. Not
Yeah.
Dr. Weston A. Price, but WAPF, because I've been to their conferences, and they're big on
Right.
just eat as many grains as you want. Doesn't really matter long as they're fermented or sprouted, and you go look around at the crowd and you understand
Yeah.
why that doesn't work. But no, we weren't. I just, to be honest with you, I've never seen so many sick people at a health conference in my life. But
It's very interesting because I've been to a lot of conferences too, and it's interesting to compare the audience at different conferences.
And I didn't get that. I didn't get you were preaching go out and eat a bunch of grains. I was just curious. I was curious because let's face it, dairy. I'm the opposite of Heath. Dairy really, really messes me up. But interestingly enough, I can eat raw organic cheese and I'm okay. Or so I think. I don't know what's going, maybe it's mildly internally doing damage. I don't know. I don't eat a lot of it to find out. But yeah, it's different for different people. I was just curious because people get confused. It's just really confusing, I think, right now because paleo is growing at a rapid rate.
Oh, yeah.
And there's so many books out there, and there's people who never even practiced paleo, who are writing books, mainstream authors, health authors, and they're throwing paleo stuff out there, and they have no idea what paleo even is. They've never followed the lifestyle or the diet.
Or we have the weight loss people that still have about 20 pounds to lose. They haven't lost the last, let's say 5 to 20 pounds, and they're preaching weight loss. Unless you've lost those 5 to 20 pounds and gotten to your ideal weight, how can you be preaching, weight loss? Because the last 5 to 20 pounds, let's face it, is the hardest to lose. And unless you've gone through that yourself, how can you talk to anybody about helping them reach their ideal weight? Yeah.
And conversely, there are some people who look healthy and strong, and they may have genetic advantages, might have been lucky, other things like that, and just because LeBron James eats a certain way, I mean, LeBron James could eat a lot of different diets and still be an amazing, incredible athlete.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
I'm glad he chose our diet and did it in the proper way. I mean, he got great results. There's an example of when somebody wanted to use paleo and lose weight, what did he do? He altered his sugar and the carbs to lose the weight, and then you can now he's incorporating other things back into his diet, but he got to his optimal weight and is happy. Now he's stronger, leaner, faster.
Well, what was interesting about that, I'm a big sports guy, so I read into it. He actually did very strict paleo, which was fairly impressive. But he only did, I want to say, 67 days. And he said the main reason he did it was to show that he could discipline himself. And I thought that was very interesting. He didn't do it more for the health benefits. He did it because he wanted to show how disciplined he could be. And that off it. It was weird. He did it but...
Yeah, I actually think there's a very clear reason why he's doing it, which is he's often been put in the position of playing a 4 or a 5 on the court and getting banged up by guys inside. And now that he's 29 or something like that, he's now thinking about extending his career.
Yeah.
And Ray Allen had such success with leaning down.
Started it. Yeah, Kobe Bryant was the first one to do it. And then they all came in. Kobe did it, I think, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, he did it.
They have a person on staff with the Lakers who teaches the paleo.
Yeah. Latest I've heard is Kobe has shifted sort of again a little bit.
Yeah. You can see it in his size actually this year.
Well, and he got that injury, and so I think when stuff like a lot of players get injured, after 35 and older. A lot of players get injured at any age. When the whole a lot of the Lakers were into that stuff, and Steve Nash diet wasn't too far off from paleo.
Yeah, and it's hard to. That's a good segue to kind of turn it into a sports thing because I'm sure you love sports too. I
love it.
Sports, yeah, and. To see the athletes and how in working I work with athletes. I had a kid who was playing at Purdue, a lineman, so I had to change macronutrients around. and how I had to tweak things to make sure he was still on an anti-inflammatory diet, but yet he had to, weigh 270, 280 pounds. How do you do that? You can't follow paleo primal practices to a T to do that. You just can't. There's no way to really do it the right way. And with athletes, it's interesting to see how they're trying to use paleo and with the macros, because, I go through bouts. I'm going into endurance training again, trying to do more and more of it. I had a major surgery and back injury years ago that I just finally can recover from, and now I'm trying to do endurance again, and I'm seeing my macros completely switch again, and trying to stay more to a more strict diet with a lower carb side. I can do it. I can ingest far fewer carbs than I used to with less activity. Yeah. But it's interesting to see that you can only go so far, and then you got to start tweaking things if you're really athletic. And, I think if you're living a normal American lifestyle,
right,
paleo is a beautiful fit. I mean, because everyone thinks we talked about this on one of the programs everyone thinks they're Michael Jordan now, because everyone wants to be like Mike from that whole thing. So they think that once they change their diet or, exercise a little bit, they can eat like Michael Jordan. And you're like, yeah. Oh, that doesn't work.
I thought it was just 7 bowls of Wheaties a day.
Yeah, and even if you were eating strict paleo, if you were eating the amount of calories he would be eating, you would still gain weight and probably be pretty miserable.
Yeah.
It's a totally different ball game. And I think that's one of the things I struggle with working with clients, is teaching them that you don't have to eat that much. You'll be full. You won't be hungry, and you have to recondition yourself, because automatically, if you're not an athlete or doing something endurance training or training hard, it doesn't take a whole lot of calories to keep you going and be healthy.
No,
really.
No, it doesn't.
Have you experimented a lot with macros and changing calorie intake?
I think I'm one of the few people in sort of this health paleo space. I have never measured the number of calories I've eaten in a single day.
I don't know. I have either.
Or the exact macronutrient ratio. I don't know why. It's just I'm just not interested in exactly weighing and measuring everything that I do. As Rob Wolf says, look, feel, and perform. And that's sort of what I go by. I'll step on a scale once every 9 months, year and a half, something like that. And it's sort of like an interesting guessing game to be like, oh, it's been a year. How much do I weigh?
Yeah, I think
I get my blood work done about once a year.
I think if you're eating balanced, you really don't have to step on a scale. What we're seeing a lot of in the paleo community is the overabundance of sugar and in the forms of honey, maple syrup.
Yeah.
Just these paleo pancakes with just tons of carbs. And sure, they're using what would be considered paleo ingredients, but they're just way too many carbs. And and it's not balanced. So when you're eating real food. And I mean, people are getting really confused. They're gaining weight. They're like, hey, I'm going paleo. I'm following these paleo recipe books. What's going on? It's because these recipes are packed with carbs and sugar, and their balance is all out of whack. I mean, it's crazy. That's one thing we try to do at the Julian Bakery is, hey, if we're going to put out products, make sure they're low sugar, make sure they're low carb. Make sure they're made with real food ingredients, and it's balanced sort of macronutrients.
Yeah.
And then you're right, you don't have to step on a scale.
Well, and how hard is it in New York for you, John? I mean, I've spent probably 6-7 months in New York working when I was with State Department. I used to do United Nations General Assembly, so I was one of the people that you probably yelled at because I was blocking all the traffic and screwed the city.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was, for me, trying to be healthy there, it was very, very difficult.
Okay, here's what's easy, here's what's hard. What's actually pretty good is people do care about food here. Grocery stores are expensive, but they have good food. Some big farmers markets like the Union Square Green Market. There are different CSAs and things like that. What's bad are a lot of the social scene here, where people are drinking alcohol all the time. Like the default thing to do in New York is, hey, let's go have a drink. Let's go have a drink.
Done it.
And it's in the evening, and it destroys your sleep. And before you know it, you've had 4 drinks. That's hard. there's a big part of the New York health scene that's big on juicing, and it's all these very sweet juices where all the fiber's been taken out, and people are paying $12 a juice and drinking one or two every day. It's insane.
The centrifugal juicers, which you don't want to use, you want to actually blend it up if you're going to do it. You know what I mean? So you at least keep some of the fiber in there, and you're not
right.
pure fructose.
Yeah. So some of that is a little off. I don't buy many packaged foods, even if they're paleo or primal or whatever. Partly that I'm sort of I'm a 31-year-old bachelor, and so I'm not doing a lot of baking.
Yeah, you could get away with it's easier. You're shopping for one and cooking.
Yeah. So, I cook up some eggs. I make fish and saute some spinach in olive oil. I, have a sweet potato, cooked in a little bit of coconut oil. I make, salads and stuff like that. So, I'm not doing a ton of the packaged foods. I think it's fine in a when you take a portfolio perspective, like your diet as a portfolio, it's a fine, okay component of it. It's just when it starts to swamp the whole thing.
Yeah, and we always talk about that it's balance. And we get in debates, and there's been debates in the paleo world about processed foods, because technically a processed food is not paleo either. But,
I'll push back on you on that, because the word process, it's a misnomer.
Exactly.
Which I wrote about.
That's what I want to get into. So, yeah.
Yeah, in industrial food is, when most people say processed food, what they really mean is industrial food. Food that has been industrially processed. Food that didn't exist, 200 years ago, or more than 200 years ago. When we think strictly about the term processing, i.e. transforming a food in some way before we eat it, cutting is a form of it's a transformation. It's a form of processing.
Sure.
If you cut meat into small bites, then it is easier to eat than having to deal with all the fiber. You're just using mechanical teeth.
And I like that section in your book. That's how I wanted to bring that up. You actually talk about that. And we're in total agreement that people take processing as, exactly, they go to the far extreme, but I've gotten in battles with people too, and I say, well, that nut you're eating right there is processed as well. So I'm a little confused. And because there's some that take this whole, more strict, really super strict approach. And I'm all, well, if you don't want it processed, don't even go to the farmer's market, because it's processed if it's laying on that table. I don't know what to tell you. You know what I mean?
Again, we can go back to this principle and say, is this a type of transformation that we're well adapted to? Cutting, fire, even fermentation, these are things that we've been doing for a very long time. Blending something in an industrial blender that breaks everything up into sort of microparticles, and then it's heated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, for a while, and all these other things. Those are completely novel forms of processing that
that's
really
actually a very, very good point. We were just talking about that. People who are juicing would think that they are far healthier than, maybe me and you, or someone eating a slightly processed food, not realizing that their juice that they just spent $12 on is highly processed and not necessarily in a form that we would properly be able to digest or utilize.
Hard to be a vegan without a blender. Richard Wrangham, in his book on fire and cooking, Catching Fire, he wrote about how a lot of raw vegans will describe what they're doing as sort of raw, completely unprocessed, and yet they'll have these big industrial blenders where they use these industrial blades to chop everything up into tiny digestible particles.
Well, and you talk about that in your book too, and I've talked about it in my books about veganism, and it's not the best way to put. I actually shop at a vegan market, but they have meat in there. It's a very good store. It's very well known.
Yeah.
And you can see them. I can spot a vegan a mile away in that store. Right? They got they're drawn. Their eyes are baggy. They can't react very quickly. I can see the real hardcore ones. But I don't think a lot of them don't do it for nutrition that I can see. It's more of this.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle.
Guys.
Kind of this kind of group mentality, and it's us against them, and we're not going to hurt animals, and and I don't know if a lot of them do it for nutrition or even understand the basis of it. I think it's more a life decision or personal decision.
I think you're right. I think it's a bit of both. And my last chapter, Gatherer, really goes deep into the psychology of vegetarianism and veganism and how disgust and empathy and some moral issues intersect and drive some of those views. I do have an admission to make that is exclusive to your podcast.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And I hope, I hope you don't immediately hang up on me, but recently I've been seeing a vegan in New York.
Wait, I think I caught one of your tweets where, like, I just kissed a vegan.
Yeah.
And I just ate 12 pieces of bacon.
Yeah. Right after 5
How is
pieces.
that going, John? I've actually dated
That's crazy.
vegetarians in the past, and it doesn't go well.
We've had some fun with it. I mean, we've just been hanging out a little bit. I wouldn't really call it dating at this point. Again, that's a New York thing.
Dating.
Yeah.
We won't get too deep into that. No,
Yeah.
Let's show for now. But also,
But I met her years ago and I saw her deadlifting in the gym wearing a pair of 5 fingers, and so I thought, okay, I have to go talk to her.
Nice.
So.
Does she make fun of any people in the paleo movement like a lot of other vegans do? Because a lot of people in the paleo movement are pretty either unhealthy or sometimes overweight. I mean, obviously there's people like yourself and others that are in great shape, like Rob Wolf and Gary over there. But I mean,
man.
Does that kind of drive you nuts that a lot of the vegans do pick on some of the paleo leaders?
I feel like when it gets. Let me give you the reverse example. I was on a panel with John Mackey of Whole Foods, who is a vegan, and it was a very civil debate, and we sort of agreed to talk about some of the things that we shared in common, and had a lot of fun with it. And then I posted a picture with John Mackey on Instagram and on Facebook, and then there were some comments about, he doesn't look very healthy, and he looks thin, and part of me was like, dude, this guy has done so much more for real food than any of these. Do we swear on your show?
Yeah, go ahead.
Any of these fucking random commenters. I don't care how he eats. He's an entrepreneur, and he created the world that he wanted to see, and I respect that. And there's sometimes some bias that goes into that. Who knows how he would look if he ate a little differently? I don't know.
You're referring to trolls, my favorite.
Yeah, our favorite to get on the internet and drive me and Heath absolutely bonkers in their basement at 1 a.m, yelling at their mom to make them a sandwich or whatever between video games. But I'm with you.
It takes a troll to beat a troll, and I'm actually a little bit of a troll.
Nice.
And
you go come back.
You got to out troll the troll,
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah, it's a good point.
You can't let yourself get ruffled. It's like it's like you're on a team sport, and the guys on the team will make fun of you for your weak spot, and if you show any defensiveness, you'll never hear the end of it.
It's a good point. That's
right. So the best situation there is agree and amplify. You'd be like, people would make fun of me for various things, and I would agree and take it to an absurd extent, and that is so much better than getting defensive.
Well, they just call me a flamethrower. I just come out and I just let everything loose, and I just tell them, okay, at the very end, I just finally go, okay, I'm going to be at this location at this time. Please meet me here, and we'll have this discussion one-on-one and not on a computer. And they go, you're such an idiot. I cannot. And I'm like, if you want to elevate it to that level and you want to be a jerk and you don't believe in what I'm teaching, don't come to my website. Don't read my stuff. Don't watch the interviews. I never have understood that. I don't have enough free time to go around and find people's stuff that I don't agree with. I don't have the energy or time.
That's a great.
Yeah, so it's like, or yeah, it's just it blows my mind, and it seems to be very prevalent in the paleo, vegan, and primal, all of the communities. It's like they all go out, and some of these, there's a whole group of them that go out and search, and so and they find it interesting that vegans, I go, I'm actually not against you. If that's the lifestyle you choose, and you're healthy and you enjoy it,
Right.
hey, I'm not
Good.
the one to tell you not to do it. Yeah, hey, I'm not going to go to you and try and convince you that my lifestyle is better. That's not my role. I'm not here to tell you that what I believe in is what you should believe in.
Right.
You have to make that up on your own free will. That is
Right. And where I do push back on them is I say, look, we weren't the ones who pathologized eating meat. You were the ones who started to pathologize eating meat, and if that's how you want to eat, fine. But to turn around and say that a purely plant-based diet is the optimal way for a human being, a Homo sapien, to eat, that's bullshit. Okay? It's wrong. It's not taken seriously by evolutionary biologists or experts in the field. It's not how we would think about an optimal diet for any other species. It's ludicrous. Now, we can talk about, there might be some circumstances where a plant-based diet has certain advantages, yada, yada, yada. Fine, we can qualify it and have some nuance. But I really, you can sort of hear it in my voice. That's where I sort of lose it, is that sort of ideology dressing up as science.
well, yeah, and for me, it's the lack of rational thought. That's why it's not. I don't look at it as a thought movement. Like I said, it's more of a moral movement, that they don't want to hurt an animal. They think it's wrong, or they don't want to eat an animal. I go, that's fine. But again, like you said, that's not scientifically based. And to this day, we have never found an ancient vegan culture ever. And we probably never will find one unless all the animals die. And you know what? We're going to die too with them, so there's not going to be any of us left to eat vegetables and trees. So I don't know what to, and it's just that thought process. And, a lot of us have talks about it. It's when you eat that type of diet, you don't have good, strong cognitive function either. And your ability to analyze and think things through and come to clear decisions, I've seen it. I've gotten in discussions with some hardcore vegans, and they can barely get one sentence out at a time in one thought.
Now there's that research done on lower sperm count and fun stuff. Interesting.
And I tweeted that out, and I sent that article to my vegan friend.
She's obviously very open-minded. Then, if you guys can poke fun at each other, and that's what I like. I don't mind poking fun at each other, but I don't like it when it turns nasty and vicious and telling me I'm a horrible person because I own a 30-06 and I will shoot a deer on occasion, or kill a dove and eat it, which is what I would have to do to survive.
Well, and what I was trying to do with the last two chapters in my book, Hunter and Gatherer, was show sort of this complementary, rather than showing paleo and vegan as polar opposites, show how they bring different things to the table. Deer hunting, there's absolutely no question that hunting deer in the United States is good for the environment. It's good environmental stewardship. It's healthy meat. It is, in many cases, the least painful way for the deer to die. The alternatives are getting torn apart by by a coyote, getting hit by a car and bleeding to death slowly by the side of the road, wasting away of disease, starving to death slowly in the winter. All you have to do is interview a few hunters or maybe one ecologist who understands deer, and you arrive at that conclusion. So it is troubling when there are entire treatises on animal cruelty and veganism, like Jonathan Safran Foer's Eating Animals, though he won't use the term vegan, that doesn't even mention hunting. And one of the reasons is that a lot of the people who write these books grew up in cities, they lived in cities their whole life, and they've stayed in cities, and they don't hunt. So they don't know.
Well, and me and Heath grew up in rural. Very rural. And so, I grew up hunting and fishing, and I still am getting back more into it now. I've had to live in cities and do all this stuff, and that's why I love that part where you talked about you went out and actually went hunting. and
Yeah.
had went out and had, it's on a private piece of property, if I remember right. And, talking about how it kind of brought up all these kind of instincts and how your senses went off and how you had to kind of rethink everything, and because people they think hunting is this evil, you're just out there to butcher and kill animals. And I understand this is a big problem right now in like Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and actually Washington, where I'm now a resident of, is wolf overpopulation.
Yeah.
And it's because all the conservatives went out there and they said, oh, the wolves population, we got to protect the wolves. Well, what they did is they made it illegal for people to hunt wolves, so they protected them. Now the wolf population is completely out of control. They're killing all the deer, all the elk, they're taking down moose, and everyone's like, this is what you get. And that's the thing is, when you start messing with ecology and Mother Nature, start playing God's role, you screw everything up.
It requires balance and sort of a practical mentality of just saying, okay, we need to put ideology aside and see what's working here.
Exactly. Well, not only that, but it's a proven fact. I can't remember if you talked about it in that last chapter, but that hunting has gone down dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and with that, that's where these overpopulations of predators, these apex predators are coming out, and they're overpopulating and feral pigs. Well, because we were not hunting them.
Right.
We got to take them out and we want to eat them. I mean, how amazing is it that there's all these pigs out there, feral pigs and hogs, that we can eat?
It's a shame we're not using all this meat for our school lunch programs. I mean, how awesome would that be? And instead of feeding them a bunch of junk food.
You would put some congressman's son, nephew out of business. He couldn't be a millionaire for doing absolutely nothing.
Yep.
If you actually did something right like that. Because actually the school program, it's been proven. I was in the military, I was in law enforcement, and I've been to schools. It's all the same food. And prisons. I've been to prisons too, not as an inmate. But I kid you not, it is literally the same.
Just a conjugal visit?
Yeah. With a vegan. But, you know what I mean? It's crazy. And when people look at that, and I go, it's an animal. It's a big machine. And from my background, I was on the inside watching this machine. And that's why I'm also a self-sufficiency advocate. And some people call me a survivalist or whatever. I don't like putting labels on that. I'm just a practical, rational human being who makes my own decisions.
It's prudent to prepare for worst-case scenarios and black swans. I'm sure you realize that a lot of the things you're preparing for are low-probability events. But if they do happen, they're going to be extremely important events. So it's foolish to ignore them.
Well, in just San Diego a couple years ago, here's a great example. The power went out. As when that guy in Arizona, he actually clipped the line, did something wrong. It was one of the power line workers or something. He did something and shut down an entire grid. I mean, for several states. And we were predicted to have power out for 2 days, I think, originally. And you should have saw the chaos in my neighborhood. 5 hours. and I mean, I live in a normal neighborhood. I mean, it's a little rural. There's horses and stuff, but people, you could hear guns going off. People were shooting rounds in the air. The party started, the bonfires. People lost their freaking mind.
Yeah, I was in the big outage, 10, 15 years ago, that East Coast outage that stretched all the way to Detroit. I was around for that, and, day one, day two, people sort of have a little fun, and they're like, oh, this is camping. I'm going to meet my neighbors again. Day 3, day 4, day 5, people start to worry and panic. Once panic happens,
start running out of food.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. And people think that I'm not an extremist. What I'm preparing for is it's more for me to live the life I want to live. I want to have a remote place where I can go, where I can hunt, where I can fish, where I can do the things I want on my property. And don't get me wrong, it's not like they're not going to tell me what to do. But at least to the point where it's the least amount possible. I mean, you still can't go there and people go, oh, so you can just go up and shoot the moose on your land? No, I can't do that. You
Right.
only get one moose in a lifetime
Right.
in Washington. You don't get just to shoot everything on your property.
Yeah.
You still have to go get a deer tag. You still have to have a hunting license.
Yeah.
But it's more of a lifestyle choice, as more of I'm not preparing for some solar flare to knock down the power grid.
Right.
That happens. We're all screwed if it knocks down everything. I mean, yeah, would I survive it? Maybe. Who knows? No one knows.
To go back to the sort of a little bit of the vegan discussion around hunting, one of the areas where I gave vegans and vegetarians credit in the book is bringing to light some of the abuses in the factory farm system. Because I'll be the first to admit it. I'm not a very emotional person, and I could go look at that. I can be aware of it, and I don't lose a lot of sleep over it. But the problem that they have is they go and use the language of emotion, and the language that comes off as sort of like hating humanity a little bit to people. And that resonates with some people, doesn't resonate with a lot of people. The way that I talk about those issues is, I'm a lifelong meat eater, and I always will be. I believe in hunting. But hunters have a certain respect for their prey. It's not about, love. It's about respect.
Yeah.
And I think it's a classic sort of like female versus male difference. Hunters, I don't know any hunters that go out there and act like sort of like violent idiots. They're responsible, they're thoughtful, they're precise, and it's considered high status to make a clean kill. Yeah. Nobody's out there torturing. I mean, the vast majority of hunters are responsible like that. But that is giving your prey respect. And I think we could give respect to, the cows that we're eating and stuff like that as well.
Well, and I talk about that actually in my book. I actually wrote a book on more of GMOs and agriculture and kind of my experience in the FDA. And I talk about that. The animal cruelty laws as they are today, if they went to any CAFO type of farm, those farms, you'd literally be prosecuted, the owners. I mean, the cruelty that goes on there and the stewardship of the animals, to me, it's unbelievable. But you're right. And in hunters, we do not believe in that type of system. And when I kill or I'm hunting, the last thing I want is that animal to suffer.
Right.
I do not want to have to shoot it twice if I don't have to. I want it to be painless, and I want it to serve a purpose. Everything I kill, I eat. I guess it's the Ted Nugent in me. I've been called the Ted Nugent health by a couple people because I got, a little bit of a bad attitude. But, but
I think you mean you're a badass. Is that what you mean?
Better, yeah. And with that, I love that chapter. Do you plan to go back out and actually get more into hunting? It's hard. You live in Manhattan, but
that's the worst part of one of the worst parts of New York. It's not only hard to go out and hunt. It's expensive and a pain in the butt to buy a gun and have a gun. I started to go through the process actually a few years ago, and there's a restriction where you have to get the approval of other people that you're living with in order to purchase a long gun. Whoa. And that struck me as off, that somebody else would that I was living with would be able to sort of basically veto my Second Amendment rights. And so I called up the police station or like the group responsible for that they put on the forms and stuff like that, and they didn't even know the exact answer. I wanted to do everything by the book, so I go, just tell me what the book says. Like, if there's somebody living in my 4-person apartment for a month and they sublet, do they have to sign it? Is it only people that are there for a period of time? Do they have to be on the lease? They couldn't give me a straight answer.
Wow.
Well, and that's done by design, right, John?
Yeah.
And I, working in the government as long as I worked almost 20 years, that laws are like that are written for a reason. It's because they can entrap whoever they want with ambiguity. Yeah. So they make it very ambiguous, and they're smart. They're lawyers that write this. So it was like the guy, I can't remember if he was traveling from New Jersey or somewhere, and he cut through New York, and he had all of his guns in his trunk. And he's transferring, he's moving, he got pulled over. Oh, you wouldn't believe, he ended up going to jail.
The woman in New Jersey or something like that recently is facing like a 2-year jail sentence for, for driving into the state with her firearms that were licensed, back in Kentucky or whatever.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, can you imagine trying to want to get into hunting? And you're like, okay, if I drive from here to there, am I going to have any special permits? What am I breaking laws? And I think that's why hunting they're doing it on purpose. Is they're not trying to get rid of hunters and per se. They're trying to out-regulate us to the point where no one can hunt anymore. Or if you can, it's on like a little square foot that you can stand on and shoot an arrow from where there's no wild animals.
Yeah. Well, and the real issue, if you actually look at the homicide statistics, suicide statistics, gun deaths, long guns, most of the violent crime is with handguns, and that's what they really want to go after is handguns. The unspoken thing, let me try to say this lots of people have written about this, is that you have very different patterns of gun violence in urban communities versus suburban or rural. In suburban or rural communities, most of the gun deaths are suicides, whereas in urban communities, and it's by whites, and in urban communities it's blacks, and it's more related to drug war type stuff, and other types of violent crime, and so you have like blue liberals in cities who actually really want to go after handguns, because that's sort of the violence that's in their area, and they don't understand. I mean, they don't care really about the Second Amendment that much, and then they also don't understand that in large swaths of the rest of the country, they don't have that issue at all.
Yeah. That's crazy. John, can you tell us a little bit about what you have coming up? We want to definitely promote anything that you have coming. Books or any place you're going to be talking. So.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Main thing is my book, The Paleo Manifesto. You can get it wherever books are sold. It's not a diet book. I'll tell people that. You have to get way far into it before you even approach anything that resembles a recommendation. So that's the main thing. I advise a few companies in the space. One is Hugh Kitchen. They're a restaurant in New York, so they're near Union Square. So if you come to New York, definitely check them out. They cook with coconut oil or olive oil at low temperature, no canola oil, seed oils, which is actually a huge thing for restaurants because it's a huge cost to them to use higher quality oils, and most people don't even know to ask about it. So.
Very cool. And your website, if you want to give that out to everybody?
Yeah, my website is huntergatherer.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, we want to thank you so much for being on the show. I think we covered a ton of topics.
Yeah.
We're going to blast this all over the place, and we'll definitely talk to you very soon. Thank you so much.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right.